I'm joined today by David Hone, who is a lecturer in zoology at Queen Mary University in London. He is an expert on dinosaur myths. You know, at the top of my list is always one. I don't know how prevalent this is on your side of the pond, as we say,
Sure.
but on our side, there is a contingent that believes Homo sapiens and dinosaurs coexisted in some kind of peaceful heaven almost on Earth at some point. Let's just start with that and see if we can dispel with that notion right away.
Well, yeah. So that's one of those great ones where it's both utterly false and completely true, um, which is always a great way to start one of these things. So it's false in the sense that classic films like 1 million Years BC and King Kong and stuff like that. So stuff like Stegosaurus and Tyrannosaurus running around with cavemen. No, absolutely not. End of story. Not to the tune of 60 odd million years.
Right.
However, you have to remember that all birds living around us today, swans, pigeons, ducks, everything, are dinosaurs. They're the direct descendants of dinosaurs. They're literally living dinosaurs. So at one level, when you ask the question, did dinosaurs live alongside man? Well, yes, I can see them out the window right now. Those are dinosaurs. So yeah, what the kind of classic, if you like, dinosaurs, what you go to museums to see what paleontologists dig up, those guys are long gone and never overlapped with humans. But we do have a group of animals alive today which are classified as dinosaurs that, of course, live with us.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about Tyrannosaurus, right? Every
Hmm.
five-year-old's favorite dinosaur, Tyrannosaurus,
Uh,
so many different
yep.
myths and sort of caricatures around that. There's this perception that exists of Tyrannosaurus as a dedicated and bloodthirsty sort of a violent
Yeah.
killing machine. Is that a fair representation of Tyrannosaurus?
Probably not, no. And to be honest, nor is the flip side, which you also often hear, which was something that kind of came up in the 80s and became popular for a while. The idea that it was just a scavenger and just, couldn't or almost never killed anything directly, but was just hoovering up dead bodies and stuff like this. I mean, one thing it's always worth remembering is that we've got to be very careful about how we characterize some of these animals. You get a lot of anthropomorphism when it comes to extinct animals. It's like, oh, they're bloodthirsty, they're relentless, they're passive, they're peaceful, all these different adjectives for different things. And the truth is, we don't know. There are some really big, but actually surprisingly gentle animals out there. Giraffe, gorilla, things like this. There are small and extraordinarily aggressive animals out there, like a lot of the badgers and members of that group. So you often get, oh, the big herbivores were peaceful and the carnivores were aggressive, and that's a very poor way of looking at these things. So that's one thing I'd immediately like to shove out a lot of the language that gets used with dinosaurs. But in terms of Tyrannosaurus, it was absolutely an active hunter. In fact, we have direct fossil evidence of Tyrannosaurus carrying out attacks on other animals because we see healed injuries. We see actually tyrannosaur teeth broken off in the bones of herbivores, and then the bones have healed over the tooth and covered it. So this was clearly an animal that bit another one, but that one, at least on this occasion, escaped and showed the injury as a result of that. But we also have direct evidence of Tyrannosaur scavenging because we have dead bodies, which, because of the way that they were buried and what we understand about the rocks and the geological formations, had already died and generally been washed down a river or something similar and got bashed up and broken, then buried. Then we see the bite marks from tyrannosaurs on them. So, of course, that's scavenging. This animal died long ago and it's already moved. And they're trying to scrape the last of the meat off. So,
And some of
tyrannosaurs were
what you're
definitely.
getting at, it sounds like, I mean, when you talk about sort of the activity of a particular
Mm,
animal, you're also sort of implicit in that making some assessment of intelligence, right? I mean, what do we know about dinosaur intelligence? And is there, like with many different animals, sort of a range depending on exactly what species we're discussing?
yeah. So intelligence is one of those, unbelievable hard things to quantify. I mean, we struggle enough to quantify it in living species. It's very hard to work out just how smart dogs are, cats, dolphins, crows, parrots, all kinds of things that have been tested. Behaviorists have spent years on these with living animals and aren't sure quite how clever they are. So just having an idea of the size and shape of a brain of a dinosaur, which is all we've got to go on, is very, very little evidence to try and build up an idea of their intelligence. Generally, things with larger brains or proportionally larger brains are smarter than things with proportionally smaller brains. That's not a big surprise. And most dinosaurs, by that measure, did not have particularly big brains and therefore were not particularly smart. But there's also lots of animals today which don't have big brains. You would think are not that clever, and actually, when we put them to the test, things like sheep, there's lots of gags about how dumb sheep are. Actually, they have incredibly good memories for other sheep. They can recognize the faces of their friends or flock mates, even years after they've seen them before. They retain a memory and can absolutely identify them.
Wow.
That's, at one level, quite a smart thing to do. And the other thing is, birds, in particular, parrots and the crow family, are incredibly smart. And a lot of them don't have particularly big brains, either in absolute size or proportional size. But actually, they have a special modification. Birds as a whole have a special modification to their brain. And they basically pack in much more brain tissue for the size of their head than we, the mammals, do. So you don't necessarily need a giant brain to be really smart. And of course, birds are directly descended from dinosaurs. We don't know at what point this special brain feature kicked in. It's entirely plausible plenty of dinosaurs had something like this. On average, though, I wouldn't put them as particularly smart, but then actually not that many animals are.
When we think about the sort of environment or the climate in which dinosaurs are often portrayed in popular culture, the theme seems to be that it is always very warm, right? The dinosaur scavenging or hunting through the jungle, for example, etc.
Yeah, it's jungles and swamps are the two big ones. You get
yeah. I mean, is there anything to that?
Well, it was certainly a place that they liked. On average, remember the dinosaurs were around for 130 odd million years. That's a long period of time, and they were on every continent. We have dinosaur fossils in Antarctica, right the way into northern Canada, right the way into China, Japan, New Zealand, Brazil, you name it, we find them. So they lived worldwide for 130 million years. Therefore, inevitably, it's always a bad idea to go, dinosaurs did this, because there's going to be an exception to that somewhere. But yes, the general period that dinosaurs were around, it was much warmer than it was now on average, but that didn't mean there weren't cool places. And indeed, towards the end of the dinosaurs' reign, so to about 70 odd million years ago, actually places like northern Canada were much like northern Canada is now. It was very cold in winter. There was probably a lot of snow on the ground, and the dinosaurs were living there in this environment. So the idea that they were limited to warm environments or limited to rainforesty, jungly swamps, that kind of thing, absolutely not true. We get them in the snow. We get them in deserts. We get them, yes, certainly in forests and rainforests, but we get them on the plains and pretty much everywhere in between, out on the coast. If there was a plot of land, there were dinosaurs living on it.
What do we know, or what can we sort of deduce about the social structure of dinosaurs? And again, it's probably a question that depends on exactly what dinosaur we're talking about.
Yeah, so we know very, very little about this for the vast majority of the dinosaurs. I mean, most dinosaurs are known from only one good skeleton or a handful of good skeletons. So, you're really, really short on data like that. For behavior, one of the things we often have is footprints, and in particular, we'll see groups of animals moving together from footprints. The problem is, of course, is that it's actually very hard to put a footprint to an actual skeleton. You can do it in a very gross sense and say, okay, this was probably a horned dinosaur, this was a carnivorous dinosaur, but going, oh yeah, those footprints are Tyrannosaurus, those footprints are Triceratops, it basically can't be done. So even if you do have, oh wow, there's a huge herd and we think there are hundreds of animals there, what was it? A horned dinosaur narrows it down to about 70 species. It doesn't tell you anything really meaningful. So yes, did some dinosaurs live in herds? Absolutely, we've got some decent evidence for that. When people say, "Oh, Velociraptor hunted in packs," no, we absolutely have zero evidence for that. for example. What we do know is there was a dinosaur, it's a fairly close relative of Velociraptor, and twice now we found apparent groups of this animal together, this thing called Deinonychus. But just because you found a few of them together, even of the same species, does not mean they were living and hunting in groups. Maybe they came together because they were mating. Maybe they died in some kind of drought. Maybe it was just unusual. Maybe they were a rare example. I mean, most cats are solitary, but lions live in packs. They live in prides. So even if Deinonychus was living in a pack and was a pack hunter, which I doubt because the evidence is very equivocal, to then go and say, oh, so Velociraptor must have done as well, it's a really bad idea. People love extrapolating far further than they should. Interesting, the one dinosaur which we do have a good feel for is a little thing called Protoceratops. This is a small horned dinosaur, though actually it doesn't have horns, but it does have the big frill at the back of the head. From Mongolia and China from about 70 million years ago. And Protoceratops is great because we have 3 or 4 groups of adults preserved together as an entire group, all about the same size, all about the same age. We then have a pair of animals about 2/3 grown together. Then we have a group of 4 young animals, probably less than a year old, and then a group of about 10 which are probably only a few months out of the nest. So we have 5 or 6 incidents now of Protoceratops living together in a group, always about the same size, always about the same age, implies they're hanging around together, and of multiple different ages. And coupled then with some footprint data that we have for them, this is one of the rare occasions where we're pretty happy that the footprints fit the skeleton, because actually there's no other animals just like them around, so it's probably their footprints. That's a pretty good evidence that these animals spent a lot of time together in groups. But we also still find lots of skeletons out on their own. So maybe they did it for some part of their lives and not others. Maybe they did it in spring and not winter. This kind of stuff we still don't know. They're probably the best example of dinosaurs living together in a group. But even that, there's an enormous difference between sheep that live together in a group, but they're mostly just kind of there, if you like, and say wolves that live in a group and actively hunt together and have a social hierarchy and a dominant male and female, and there's breeding rights and stuff. So just being in a group is really not the same thing as necessarily a social structure, or again, actually going back to intelligence, how they interact and stuff. And that's still very, very hard to pull apart or begin to decipher.
David, in the very limited time I have left, Jurassic Park, I mean, the way dinosaurs are depicted in Jurassic Park, by and large, accurate, inaccurate?
If you go back to the original film in 93 or whatever it was, for the time, very good. Mostly they were taking a lot of information on board from modern research, and they were putting it into their animals. And as the series went on, and Jurassic World is perhaps the epitome of this, they just haven't updated. So Jurassic Park was pretty cutting edge for 1993. Jurassic World is 1993 dinosaurs shown in 2014, 2015. In other words, they're now the best part of 25 years out of date. We know a lot more about them. And therefore, things like Velociraptor, it should have feathers. We kind of suspected that in 1993, but we weren't that sure. Now we're 100% sure it should be properly feathered like a bird. That's a really big difference. Things like, actually, ironically, Stegosaurus is the one that people keep bringing up. Stegosaurus in the second film, Jurassic Park 2, it's a really good rendering of Stegosaurus. It looks great. It's just a bit big. The one in the new Jurassic World, they've got its tail dragging on the ground like you see the illustrations of dinosaurs from the 1940s. So they've actively gone back about 70 years in research between the second film and the fourth film. So that's really not up to date and is, actively bad. And just to fill in on this, at one level, I don't care because it's fiction. At the other level, I care a hell of a lot because people come to me and come to museums and talks, and they go, yeah, but that film showed it, and that film's right. And so, because the public are very bad at understanding the difference between fact and fiction, as far as I can tell.
You're telling me.
And at least the original Jurassic Park made a big deal of how up-to-date their dinosaurs were. I think that's become a big holdover. And therefore, I really am ambivalent about this because at one level, it's fiction, it's a film. I went and watched Jurassic World, it was fun. At the other hand, I go out and do talks in schools and online and stuff like this, and I get asked questions about things they saw in the film, assuming they're true.
Right.
And that's kind of a worry, and or at least with my educator hat on, very frustrating indeed that people think this is either accurate or even, actively trying to be particularly accurate and up-to-date science. And it's not, as I say, in some ways they're even going backwards.
All right. David Hone, lecturer in zoology at Queen Mary University of London. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you very much for having me on.